Gaze reading where the greats drop by. Trendy authors tell us all the who, what, and why. Anyone can listen cause we're spoiler free. Gaze reading from Pulitzer stars to book club picks, where the curious minds can get their fix. So you say you're not gay, well that's okay. There's something for everyone. Gaze reading.
Hello and welcome to Gaze Reading. I'm your host, Jason Blitman, and on today's episode, I have Yann Martel talking to me about his new book, Son of Nobody. Yann, of course, is the author of Life of Pi, and I am so excited to have him here today. I'm exhausted. This past weekend was the Palm Springs Book Festival. It was so incredible. There were 34 events over the course of 3 days. And I just couldn't have asked for a better event. It was really special. And I know there were some of you that were there. And thank you for saying hello. It was so great to meet in person, in real life. And yeah, it was just awesome. And it was a great reminder of what being in a little bookish community is all about. And so I encourage you, if there's a book something happening in your town or somewhere near you, whether it's a festival or a fair or an author's event or something, that it's worth going to. Oh my God, I don't have a voice, but it's worth going to because, yeah, you never know who you're going to meet, or it's just great to hang out in a room with like-minded people. And what are some highlights? Well, we screened the first episode of the series Margot's Got Money Troubles, and it was so great. I cannot wait to keep watching it. That was awesome. And yeah, they're really fun things. I hosted a game show version. It was a pseudo version of Family Feud called Authors Feud. It was fiction authors versus nonfiction authors. And that was what one of the polls and surveys that I put out recently was all about. So for those of you who filled that out, thank you so much. It was a big part of the festival weekend. So much appreciated. I am going to sign off for now because I feel like I probably sound ridiculous. I was doing a lot of talking this weekend, but I am so glad you're here. If you are new to Gaze Reading, welcome. You could find more about us on Instagram at Gaze Reading. Our website is gazereading.com. We have a Substack. We have merch. There are all sorts of things. Oh my goodness. And anyway, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy to be a part of a bookish community. And please enjoy my conversation with Yann Martel. How are you today? Oh my God, that mug is so big.
Oh, Tom, you're the second person to say that. You're the second person to say that. It's just a big little porcelain shop. It's only herbal tea. It's not coffee.
You took a sip of it and it covered your whole face.
Yeah, you're right. We did. Yeah, I guess so. It's herbal tea I want to drink a lot. It's just to hydrate myself. If that were coffee, I wouldn't be sleeping. Anyway, you asked. I'm a little bit frazzled. I have so much to do before I leave next Tuesday. More emails. Emails just never stop. Just arranging a million details. And also just other things in my life too. It's not just it's just a lot of stuff to do. But anyway, it's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good stuff.
Great. Yann Martel, welcome to Gaze Reading.
Thanks for having me.
I just say it like that.
You go ahead. I'm happy to be here.
You are here to talk about your new book, Son of Nobody, which is one of the most unique things I've ever read. And I'm sure this is like the 8th time you've heard somebody say that. This is not going to be the end of people telling you this.
I'm glad people are responding positively to the sort of inventiveness in the way in which it's told. I'm glad about that. So it's good to hear.
Yeah. For the listeners, what is your elevator pitch for the book?
It's a story of a Canadian scholar at Oxford who discovers a lost Trojan War story, told from the view of a commoner, so not from a king or a queen or even a god, but from a commoner who's fighting in the Trojan War. And it's told in quite an inventive way. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Of course. This is the story of a story. So I'm curious, what is the story of the story? Where did this come from for you?
It started, first of all, by actually reading the Iliad. I mean, like a lot of kids, I grew up on the Greek myths. The Greek myths really speak to children. They're just so inventive. and so horrific, so much suffering. And to read about horror is delightful. And sure, a kid when it's not your suffering. So they're very inventive. They're really good. In a sense, they're very good moral lessons, not cloaked in religiosity at all. When you're a
Yeah.
bad boy or bad girl, the Greek gods really make you pay for that. So they're very vivid, very violent, very colorful. So I grew up on those, but I never actually read any of the source material. I'd never read the Iliad or the Odyssey as a kid. So only very recently did I actually read the Iliad. And I was expecting it
Hmm.
to be venerable and slightly boring. But in fact, it's astonishing. This is the very first book in the West, how inventive it is. Some of it is really quite cinematic. There's one scene when a river god is angry at Achilles and is pursuing him. So you have a river pursuing across sand this character, Achilles, to try to kill him. And the only way he's saved is Hera sends Hephaestus, her son, to blast away at the river, like with a flamethrower. It's kind of a Hollywood epic movie. So some of the images are startling and some of the questions are still really interesting. So anyway, I read the book and said, wow, I can do something with this. And right away I started getting ideas and it fell into place. So that was the very first step, is reading a book.
What inspired you to even pick up the Iliad?
My partner said you should read this book. She had just read it, and the Iliad, like a lot of these foreign texts, you have to get the right translation. There are a lot of
Yeah.
translations of the Iliad and of the Odyssey that are quite academic. You know, they try to be as close as possible to the original, to the cadence, to everything, which from a scholarly point of view makes sense. But if you're just wanting to hear the story as it were being told to you live, can slow the reading experience, burden it. So I read one by an American translator called Stephen Mitchell, who himself is a poet. He had already done a translation of the Bhagavad Gita that I'd loved. And it's a very swift, lean. He's cut away a lot of stuff that were necessary if it was being told in Greek in the dactylic hexameter, but not if you're using freer style and you really want to just get to the story. Not that still a very good translation, but it's just leaner. And it's just that I read that and I said, "Oh wow, this has so many modern parallels, so many modern echoes." There's something specifically about the Trojan War that's
I asked about it
big
because
characters
you
that
said
you
you
thought it
thought it
might
might
be
be
boring.
boring or whatever the phrase that you used. So I wasn't sure why you even picked it up in the first place, but I love that it was essentially recommended to
Yeah,
you. And knowing that I say a lot that I am a relatively late in life novel reader, and I'm now a champion of finding the right thing. And sometimes that right thing is the right translation of a story.
absolutely. Absolutely. As I said, you want one that speaks to you. And there's a famous one previously called by this guy, Richmond Lattimore. If I'd read
Mm,
this as a first one, it would have been boring. It's burdened, it's so repetitious. As it is, it's a 3,000-year-old text, so it's not as lean and chiseled as a novel written by someone who took creative writing in the year 2026 in America. So it needs one that not doesn't massage it, but that conveys the living breath of it. And the Stephen Mitchell one really does. So that was the first start.
yeah.
The first step was reading this Iliad and being really struck at how modern in many ways it was. Despite being the oldest book, it's still, hence why it still speaks to us so much. There's something about it that's very contemporary.
The the angle of the perspective of the commoner, the it's I learned this of course from reading the book, but in the original text the merchant has one line, and that's sort of it, and that's all we hear from a quote unquote commoner. And it made me think so much about in books and film and all sorts of things where we like don't know what's going on in the background, or we don't know what's going on when someone's not on screen. And it made me think about even like people going to the bathroom in stories, right? You don't get the sort of daily life, the regular things in quotation marks that are happening. And I think a commoner in this story is a quote unquote regular thing, a person who's not necessarily, they're not going to withstand the test of time per an orator, right? First of all, I'm curious, are you familiar with the play Gary? Has this come up for you at all?
No, Gary, no.
Okay, there's a play called Gary, written by Taylor Mack, that was on Broadway in 2019, and it starred Nathan Lane and Andrea Martin. She got injured and then got replaced at some point. It's the story of these two essentially janitors who had to clean up after the story of Macbeth was done.
A lot of blood to clear up then.
A lot of blood, a lot of bodies. So the play is basically a giant pile of bodies and these two janitors and like the aftermath of that.
I'll write that down. That sounds really cool. Anyway,
Seems very on brand for this story, but it seemed like a cousin of this. What was it about this sort of unnamed merchant that meant something to you,
well,
that made you think, you know what, there's a story
that's
here?
exactly it, though. One thing that's interesting to know in the Iliad is that nobody speaks who isn't a noble person, a prince or a princess or a queen or a king or a god, with one exception.
Yeah.
There's a soldier named Thersites who, when he speaks, insults and rails against Agamemnon, saying, "Why are we here? We've been here for 10 years for nothing. You're getting treasury, everything we steal from the towns, you get, all the women. What do we get? Nothing." And he's promptly beaten by Odysseus because he's questioning the social order. His reproaches against the war make total sense. Why would an ordinary Greek soldier want to fight when there's so little to gain for it? And it's not a quick little war of a couple months, Missy, like people in 1914 thought the First World War would be. It's been dragging on for 10 years and with no end in sight. So why would they? It makes total sense. And yet he's promptly beaten with no real explanation. And so that resonated with me because I think, as I said, there's many parallels that are vivid, but I think we live right now in a time where, in a sense, the common voice is totally disempowered. We're ruled by these elites, whether it's Jeff Bezos or Jeffrey Epstein or these dictators, where the concerns, the simple, ordinary concerns of the ordinary man, woman, and child are ignored. The American middle class, for example, is shrinking. Everything is being catered now to the ultra rich. I've noticed that even myself. When I went to LA the last time with two of my children, we went to Universal Studio, and you can get those passes where you can cut the line and you can go right to the ahead. And they cost a fair
Mm.
bit of money, but it makes sense that Universal would do that because, hey, we get fewer people, so it's not as crowded. They pay more. So who cares about the ordinary person who's going to wait in line for 2 hours? And I think all of America is doing that. They're catering to the fewer who have more money and ignoring the vast majority. It's the greater good for the fewest rather than greater good for the greatest number. So I feel, despite my success as a writer, I feel totally connected to ordinary people in their ordinary lives. Democracy, the
Yeah.
whole point is to have everyone matter. So it's that kind of disempowerment that you see during the Trojan War. I see it all the time today. With the rise of
Mm.
American fascism and Donald Trump here, he's only catering to people like him, these corrupt elites. And the ordinary person, he says he's doing something for them, but in fact, he's not. I said to me, the voice of the commoner very much speaks to me today because we're not being heard.
Yeah. You're talking about the Iliad feeling very contemporary, of course, through the lens of a contemporary writer. Son of Nobody, the book is overwhelming in its relatability.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I try. I didn't want to make it hard to read. People, because of the funny half-page stuff and the epic verse, but I wanted to be accessible. It's not a complicated book to read. Once you get into it, once you understand how it works, that there's fragments and there's footnotes, to me, none of them are difficult to read. I was looking for a book that was, as you said, relatable, because it's, as I said, I'm hoping
Yeah.
we'll relate with Souls of Medea and indeed with Harlow. They have a parallel. They also leave their families hoping to gain, and they finally lose everything. And the system is stacked against them.
This is the first time we're talking about footnotes in the book. So the story is really made up of this epic poem that is getting uncovered by the scholar that you spoke of, Harlow, and his footnotes, where he's really footnoting the text, but also you learn a lot about him and his story as well throughout the footnotes. There's a great quote in the book that we all live lives that are footnotes to a greater story. And so I think it's obviously a beautiful parallel between the epic poem that we're reading, the sort of greater story, and then the footnotes of this one scholar that we're getting to experience. What does thinking about the greater story feel like for you? And I mean that in the sense of you are a footnote in the big story of the world, right? We are, as humans, sort of our
Exactly. That's
individual
exactly the
footnotes.
point. I love the lowly footnote. I'm the sort of reader who does read footnotes. the
Yeah.
graphical ones, but ones that had a little extra story. I love footnotes. And indeed, I think we are footnotes to a greater story. Each of our little individual stories, which we may feel is not really important, but collectively, that's what makes the whole story. That is what is the story. So I wanted
Hmm.
to elevate the lowly footnote and make it a star. And I really liked it as a writer because it was very fun to have these. The epic verses are one unified thing, telling the story of So's and Medea
Hmm.
at Troy 3,000 years ago. But these footnotes allowed me to do a lot of stuff. They could be like academic about the Iliad, they could be pseudo academic about the Soad. And then they allowed me to talk Harlow's story, which is in parallel to that of Soad. So there was something very varied about it that I really enjoyed doing. And I like this idea of telling a story through footnotes. I don't see why I would want to tell the story in the same way, because the obvious way to tell the story would have been a scholar goes to Oxford, discovers the story. Here you're going to have extensive flashbacks, extensive quotes of it. But I didn't like that. First off, because that was more conventional. And it also would root the story
Hmm.
in the present now while we're at Oxford. Whereas now with the divided page, top half you're 3,000 years ago, bottom half you're in the present. I like that sort of that both is given its own time frame and its own kind of language in a
Yeah.
sense. Epic verse for 3,000 years ago, snappy little footnotes for today with dialogue and stuff like that. I like the sort of the contrast.
Going back to just the concept of Homer and the Odyssey and the Iliad, when I was a freshman in high school, our English teacher, for extra credit, we could memorize the prologue of the Odyssey.
Oh,
And in reading this, it made me think about that. And I was like, oh, tell me, O muse, of that ingenious hero who traveled far and wide. That was where my memory stopped. But I was like, the fact that I even
yeah.
remembered that much shocked me. And I'm still connected with this English teacher. I texted
Well,
her and I said, I can't believe this came to my mind. If you were to appeal to a muse when you sat down at the writing desk, what what does that look like for you? What is your appeal? What are you hoping to get from the spirits?
well, that would apply to all of my books. You know what? When you're a writer,
Yeah, that's what I
you're
mean.
kind of like a vacuum cleaner. You want to pick up something substantial. And not an
Yeah.
anecdote,
Mm.
a story, a proper story is something you can live with for a long time. It's something that is not super clear. It has to have a degree of mystery. And as a writer, you have to be able to live with it for several years. I'm not a particularly quick writer. And you want it to be something that you can live with and hopefully that the reader can live with and not fully understand. It has to have some mystery. And those just pop in your head. This one I said was a result of reading the Iliad. Life of Pi came to me when I went to India. It was literally
Hmm.
that country that brought it to me, traveling through India. The novel after Life of Pi was called Beatrice and Virgil, and it was about the Holocaust. And that was, I always had an interest in the Holocaust. And then once I finished Life of Pi, and it was unbelievably successful, and I finally had a bit of peace and quiet. I just naturally went back to that great tragedy. And there, on Strange enough, it was just horror that brought me my next novel. It was called Beatrice and Virgil.
Hmm.
It was the horror of the camps. I visited them several, especially Auschwitz. So each one, the muse is different, but in each case, you want to create something that works as a story. And what that is something that's both entertaining. There's no point to read a boring story. You want to work a bit sometimes, but you can't be ultimately boring.
Sure.
And at the same time, to me, you want something that does elevate you. But it
Hmm.
can't just be entertaining because otherwise it's forgettable. If it's really slick and good and amusing and doesn't disturb you in any way, then it's utterly forgettable. It's like a Netflix series that you love, and then the second it's done with, you can't remember anything about it.
Yeah. And this book, people are going to read it and like it or hate it, you're not going to forget it. It is such an interesting reading
I hope
experience,
so.
and that
Yeah.
is really
I like the
cool.
idea of taking a story and
Um,
breaking it into pieces. Like most things are unified. Here you have the fragments, you have the different kinds of footnotes. And at the end of it, you have to make sense of it. You have to bring it all together. So I like that idea of deconstructing the story and not in a sort of highfalutin, pretentious way. This is just, as you might see in any number of books, text with footnotes. It's a common thing in more academic texts. Heroes playing with it.
ab-
You have to throw it
absolutely.
together. And that's what really appealed to me. Yeah, so I hope people remember it.
I'm sure they will. That's the point. And it's fun because you're clearly a playful writer, and we'll get into that a tiny bit more in a minute. But the more I'm hearing from you and the more research I've done on you, I was curious if Harlow is, I don't want to call him Homer obsessed because that's not totally fair, but like he knows everything about the Homeric stories. He is quite the scholar. You want that out of a scholar. And I was curious what Homer is for you, but it's sounding like it's whatever the journey that you're on, that's your Homer.
Exactly. You know what? I did love Homer, but I'm not a Homer scholar. And ask me in 2 years, and I've forgotten about it. Just as when I finished Life of Pi, I knew a lot about animal behavior and zoobiology and survivology and a fair bit about religion. Whereas now, or after I finished Beach Universal, I knew a lot about the Holocaust. As I said, I'm always searching. I'm a searcher. For each book I
Yeah.
write is answering some kind of question. Like Life of Pi, I mentioned this weird thing called faith. Why do people still have religions around when so obviously science and technology and human rights have trumped religion? We've gone beyond that. Why do people still end up in churches and mosques and synagogues? What was that about? In Bayesian Virgils, how do we talk about the Holocaust? Each one has a different question. So right now I'm in my Homer phase. And I'd say Harlow Dunn in the novel has a passion. And in fact, one of the questions that is asked in the book is my work worth it? Was it worth it that I left Canada for England? Just as so as asked, was it worth it that I left Greece for Troy? This illusion of winning something big, does that really work out? Was it worth it? Is our work worth it? Every hour I spent on this book, was it worth it away from my children? And I'm leaving
Yeah.
on a tour now. I'm missing my children. Are these things worth? This is a question that I was asking myself. Homer's very good at that, at asking those big questions.
Is there a thing that you love so much that you wouldn't write a book about it?
I don't know. Never been asked that. It's not love, it's curiosity that gets me to write something, is when I figure things out by writing about it. So here you said I was an inventor. I'll show you something. The next thing I'm working on, I'm right here.
Oh, I've heard about it, which is what I wanted to talk to you about.
This? No.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, The Forgiven and the Forgotten. You talked about it on another podcast.
Oh, did I? Yes, I did.
Yes,
This one
you
was my
did.
mother's Alzheimer's. She's 85.
Uh-huh.
She's a shadow of who she used to be. And I've been living with that for a number of years, but I was in Mexico alone, without family. They left. I had a week for this fellowship in San Cristobal de las Casas. And I just started thinking about her, and not just as her dutiful son, her loving son, but more of she can't remember anything now. Now she's starting to conflate stories and people. She's misplayed, like she thinks she's regressing to childhood now, but everything's mixed up. She's confusing things in a kind of way that storytellers do. They'll take something from here, something over there, and tell a story. So there's a coherency to what she's saying in the sense that she's telling a little story, an anecdote from her life, but it didn't happen because she's mixing things up. So anyway, this mixing up of chronology. So yeah, this was led by curiosity. What do you do with loss of memory? Yeah, it's a box. It's in a box because it's 52 chapters, and you can read them in any order you want.
Yeah.
You can read this one first or that one first. They're some are as short as 1 page, some are as long as 16. And it's the same story, but you approach them from different angles. And it's not just one unified linear story. It jumps around too, because one of the ideas was to test the reader's memory. There's incessant cross references, but depending where you start, for example, at one point I mentioned a Kafka story, Josephine and the Mouse People, and there's 3 little booklets that talk about that. So depending on which one you read first, you'll get a different sense of it. And that's within 52. Yeah. So there's 52 chapters, weeks in a year, cards in a deck of cards. I like that coincidence. Or not coincidence, that's how it inspired, I don't know. But this idea that life's a game and life has seasons. And anyway, the reader can deal themselves whatever card they want. So yeah, so that's once again, but that was going to curiosity. What's my artistic response to this loss of chronology, this loss of memory, this mixing up of things?
Where does that outside of the box thinking come from for you? I think so many authors would just sit down and write a at least more traditional story, particularly within the confines of 2 hardcovers, right, and some binding. But I don't know. I think it's very interesting.
I think honestly, probably just a natural inclination. I read stuff when I was a kid that was, I guess, experimental, but everything there's so much literature. In fact, if you look at it, is experimental. William Faulkner with his long sentences, Hemingway with his short little cadences, Virginia Woolf with her repetitiveness. It's out there. I guess it just attracted me, this idea of why not tell things in a sort of inventive way, but without being tiresome. You also get postmodern books that are tiresomely inventive. They wear their welcome out. So it's getting that right balance of
Mm.
being with the reader, but also telling the story in a different way.
Yeah. You saying that the longest chapter in The Forgiven and the Forgotten is 16 pages is music to my ears. And I'm sure most readers too. We love a
Oh,
short
I love
chapter.
Word Cap. Hour 16.
Yes.
Most are much shorter. It had to do with the folding of the pages, right? Single page,
Right,
double
of
page has
course.
4. Put another page, you have 8. So
Right.
they either have to be,
Oh my
1,
God.
2, 4, 8, or 16. And some are in between.
Right.
So I rather often have to cut some blank pages away. But I tried to make them fit that.
I have another play to send your
Mhm.
way. It's called The Norman Conquests by a British author named Alan
Oh, yeah.
Ackburn.
Okay. This is what
So it's the story of a group of friends weekend away at a country house. And it's 3 plays. And each play tells the same story, but from the perspective of a different
Hmm.
room.
Rooms.
So you have, yeah, so you have the dining room, you have the living room, and you have the garden. And so each play it only takes place in the living room, or it only takes place in the garden, or it only takes place in the dining room, and it's the same story.
On what
So
night you go, like one night you'll get the garden. If you go the next night, you'll get the living room.
and you could go see all 3 of them and get every perspective of the story, or you could just see one. So in one, you hear like a clamoring sound happening off stage, and you wonder what that is. Someone comes running into the room and says, "Oh my God, something just happened." And then in another play, you see what is clamoring on stage, and then you see that person run out.
Oh, super cool.
So
I like that kind of, if it
again, a very
works,
sort of non-traditional.
yeah, if it works, then it's really fun. It's not just a razzle dazzle, but actually a meaningful way of saying, that one would be, life is partial. You only get part of life. You stop trying to make sense of it. No, that's really good. I'll definitely take note of that one too. Huh.
It's brilliant. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. It's really
Okay.
terrific. Anyway, all of this, hearing about your journey of morphing into a thing that you're inspired by, that you're excited about, do you know what that makes you?
What?
A chameleon.
Indeed, I actually use that in another interview that I'm like a chameleon. I'll take the color, whatever subject matter I'm into.
What's with all the chameleons? What's with all the chameleons?
In a sense, remember I was saying that to me, life is about resilience. You have to
Yeah.
be in the moment wherever you are while still being yourself. You have to try to take these other influences in. So I like the idea of the chameleon in the sense that, as I said, the book itself is a chameleon. The top of the page is a verse, the bottom are footnotes. So in each case, you are someone different. At the top, you're so, as in the bottom, you're Harlow. So I wanted just to have this little idea of versatility and adaptability. Precisely what, in fact, failed the Greeks at Troy. They didn't manage to realize, hey, after 1 year, maybe this is enough. We should go home. They couldn't change themselves enough. Also, it's one of these little intriguing things. It's like in Life of Pi, there's this island and there are meerkats. I just threw in meerkats because they're funny little creatures and I wanted the island to be puzzling, but nonetheless interesting. So throw in a funny little animal. That'll make it. But really, it was also in just a storytelling way. So I need some links here. Something. Don't forget the Greek epic was very repetitive. The
Mm-hmm.
Trojans are horse tamers. Achilles is fleet-footed. The sea is wine dark. So that's incessant in older translations. Those come up incessant because the bard used that to round off their meters as they're reciting it. I wanted a certain degree of repetition too, and that was just one. That here we'll have this repetition. The bard is using chameleons. In part, it's also amused me to think that did people know that there are chameleons and porcupines in Greece? Probably not. There are porcupines and there are chameleons. And it's a funny looking animal too. It's
That's
such
so
a weird
funny.
looking animal. I
Yes, of
like that.
course. Even Harlow is what the hell? What's with all the chameleons? So
You are.
it's funny that we all are
We're
one
not
same
always
thing.
looking at the same thing. The two eyes can be divergent. I also found it interesting as a
Uh-huh.
metaphor of reality is in one core thing. It can be many things and yet still be. So I thought it was a weird this animal.
Yeah.
I like the illustrations. I was very happy with the illustrations in the novel. They're well done by the illustrator.
Yeah. Earlier, you talked about how the Iliad is not cloaked in religiosity. And Harlow, through transcribing, I think is really seeing parallels between Homer and religious text. The quote is that both texts speak with authority, but the authority of the Gospels relies on its claim to truth, while the Iliad relies on its power to captivate. And I'm curious for you, your relationship to religion, were these light bulb moments for you? Were they obvious as you were going through writing? I was surprised thinking, why are these not the gods that everybody is worshiping in this country? I started talking to my husband about it, and he reminded me of the history of things that led to where we are today, which of course, but yeah, I'd never really compared the texts in that way.
Listen, I grew up completely secular. My parents are from Quebec originally, where there was a thing called the Quiet Revolution, which is when Quebec went from being super
Mm,
Catholic to being completely secular. The province woke, the Beatles came in, and Jesus left. They just, for why are we religious here? It's just holding us back. So it went from being the most
yeah.
backward part of Canada to being the most progressive, social democratic, as anti-clerical. So my parents were children of that revolution. I was a grandchild. So in my upbringing, art replaced religion. If you want to understand life, read, watch, listen to great art. And I love that. It made me become a writer. But eventually I ran on empty. So that's why this trip to India, where I saw manifestations of religion that were intriguing. And then my insight there was I saw that art and religion share the same kind of language, that of magical thinking. Both have to do with going
Mm,
beyond rationality and using our imagination. In art, you invent worlds, but they reflect our world. They're like mirrors. And in religion, you create worlds that emanate from our world. And both you can access through, which is why when I say that Jesus is a fiction, it's not an insult. I'm just saying if you're interested in Jesus or Allah or Buddhism, no matter, you can't access them through rationality. That'll give you nothing because there's no mystery in that. That's resolving everything to those utter clarity, and it's no longer interesting. It's all about mystery. Same thing with
yeah.
great art. A great painting is not a pat thing. It's still it exudes a mystery. Same thing with religion. So both have to be accessed, both art and religion, through the imagination. That's the portal that is needed. So I discovered an alternate view of religion, of unorganized religion through writing Life of Pi. And then when I read the Iliad, I was struck at how antithetical it was to the Gospels. Because the first word of the Iliad
Mm,
is minim, wrath. And it's all about anger management, failed anger management. It's all about these angry men. It's all about the consequences of anger, of not being loving. And then a few centuries later, a few miles to the east, you have this other story, which is all about love, and both rooted in the same
mm,
language. That's what was to me was a inkling that there's some in relation here. Paul's letter to the Corinthians and all those letters of Paul, which are the oldest Christian texts, those were in Greek. The Gospels are written in Greek. It was the language of the
mm.
educated. And at that time, everyone would be familiar with Homer. He was the only bestseller. It's not the original. He was the only, he was by far the most popular text. So I'm thinking, here's his
Yeah.
language carrying the story by someone who never meets Jesus, but has visions of Jesus. And to me, interprets Jesus through Homer's Iliad, because the Iliad is unbelievably tragic. Really, no one wins in the Iliad. You either die young and perhaps are immortal, like Achilles, but likely you'll die young and be totally forgotten. So, as are any other commoner. And if you don't do that, well, you die
Yeah.
anyway, because life's pretty miserable then. And there's nothing redeeming about it. There's no heaven in Greek religion. Both the Elysian fields are all right, but pretty gray. So it's a deeply tragic view of life because that's all they had. And then you have this response a few hundred years later by saying, hey, maybe there's a better possibility out there. Maybe we should love instead of hate. Maybe that'll open doors. Anyway, that it struck me that both these mythological stories, the Trojan War and Jesus of the Gospels, which you can only access through your imagination, are in dialogue with each other. And what the problem in
Right.
one is resolved in the other. Don't worry about rationality. Don't be insane, but use your rationality once you believe something and choose to believe in love and that there's maybe something more than this material world. The two really spoke to me. And that's one of the things that took off for me was this noticing not so much what happens in the Iliad, but the emotional tenor of it, the tone of it, that deep sadness. And what do you do with that?
Hmm.
That's one of the questions I asked in the book was what do you do with the sadness of mortals?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was thinking about, oh, if I maybe I'm thinking about Greek mythology as a more religious experience because I wasn't brought up with it
Right.
as a religion. I'm very a-religious, but you don't feel like it's getting shoved
No.
down your
No,
throat
now we
in
call it,
quotation marks as any
yeah,
sort of religion.
now we call it,
But now you look at it and you're like, oh, this I can learn from this in the way that I can understand people are learning from
see, that's
Gospels,
why
right? So,
I
which
think,
is
as I said, kids and people like Greek myths because we call them Greek myths. We forget that they actually was the religion of the time. And if you read the Iliad, they make sacrifices to the gods. The interaction is incessant, whereas in Christianity, frankly, Jesus is largely absent, or God is largely absent. We're always hoping for him; he's never around. In the Iliad,
yeah,
the gods are portrayed as very present, speaking in all kinds of ways, flights of birds, strange sounds. They were much more present, and it was their religion at the time. But now we've downgraded that to just being myths, and they happen to be very colorful, like the Norse gods, Odin, Thor. They're more approachable because they seem like they
yeah.
came out of a Marvel Comics movie.
They also all have their
Yep,
lane.
exactly. Yeah, correct. Oh, yeah. So yeah, they do have. So Aphrodite is about attraction, desire, love. Hephaestus is sort of maybe about hard work and practicality. Yeah, you're right. They all have. I said there is a morality to the Greek myths. That usually,
Yeah.
not often, bad people are punished. You know, if you chop up your children and feed them to the gods, you will be punished. Goodness isn't necessarily rewarded. There's a lot of arbitrariness to the fate of men and women in Greek myth. But nonetheless, there is a morality to it, but it's not shoved down your throat the way sometimes Christianity might
Right.
do it.
This is the most I've ever talked about religion on the show because it was just so fascinating. And again, a parallel I had never really seen. But you had said art replaced religion and you would read, watch, and listen to great art. What are some of those things that you remember as a young person that you were reading, watching, listening to?
Oh God, so many. First of all, my parents used to drag me to museums as a kid because my parents were diplomats. So we lived in France, in Paris. Wherever we traveled, they would drag me to the art museum, the local art museum, which initially as a kid I hated. And then I realized I loved it. So I love painting. I'm going on a tour of Australia in May, and one of the things I'm going to do is they have great art museums there. Every morning, I'm going to go to the same art museum that I visited several years ago. So I love visual arts. I love what people do with paint on flat canvas. I grew up on it, and I love that sort of stuff. I love everything from Picasso to Jackson Pollock. My parents really liked abstract art, and I had a lot of
Amazing.
abstract art in my life. So I love that stuff because you can't just define. You don't know what it's about. You have to try to figure it out. I like abstract art. Lots of books. I grew up reading. I remember the first time I cried reading a book. It was a thing called Le Petit Chose, The Little Thing, which was the main character in a novel by a French writer named Alphonse Daudet. And he has a miserable life. And I remember bursting into tears, and I remember being embarrassed. I must have been maybe 10. And I was embarrassed that I was crying from reading a book. It seemed silly. So I went to the bathroom to cry. So that showed me how moving stories could be. And I read everything. I read everything from comic strips, Asterix and Obelix and Tintin, and then to Sherlock Holmes. I graduated and then at university, I studied philosophy, but I also took English literature. I read the standard canon of the dead white males, everything from, the Victorians like Thomas Hardy. I love Joseph Conrad, the Anglo-American tradition, Hemingway. One I really like that's sort of forgotten now, Sinclair Lewis. American ones like Willa Cather. I remember reading My Antonia. And Death Comes from the Archbishop. Liking that a lot. Cats, I really like
Look,
Cats. I love
sounds like a lot of this really laid a strong
It
foundation for
did.
you.
There's a lot you can
Yeah.
do with the written word. It's obvious what a book does. You are someone else for a while when you read a book. So I remember loving a book
Yeah.
called The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima. That had a strong impact on me. Yeah, a lot of books marked me. My favorite living writer, he's getting pretty old now, is J.M. Coetzee. Coetzee, the South African, well, he's Australian now. Disgrace, The Life and Times of Michael Kay. He won the Nobel Prize a while ago. He's like Hemingway. He does a lot with very little. His style is incredibly spare and yet very powerful in a way I can't quite figure out. So I like his stuff. I love Agatha Christie.
I like push the button on what are some of these things that had an impact on you, and they just come pouring out of you. I love this. But there is this really beautiful pair of questions that come up in the book that I wanted to, I don't know, ask about, unpack a little bit with you. But the questions are, what is the weight of a dream? What is the weight of reality? And which tips the
Well,
scale? And that really jumped out at me. And I'm curious what these things mean to you.
I said that was laying the grounds for this idea of what do we do and is it worth it? And
Yeah.
you obviously have to attend in life to practical details of how you get food on the table. You need a minimum degree of material welfare, but that's not enough. That's not enough. Ennui will come quickly. And that's the delusion of wealth. People think that if you have a lot of money, they're really be happy. No, a pop star who's made $40 million before they're 22, but then their career goes to nothing. Those 40 million, yeah, the rest of their life, they can drive their Jaguar, they can have a house in Miami and a pied-à-terre in Paris. But what are they going to do for the next 60 years of their life? You need
Yeah.
something to, and so you need that dream. And once again, just to make that comparison again that I make incessant between religion and art, both are about dreams and dream states. When you write a book, you are creating a world like a little god. And it's a wonderful thing to do. And when you are religious, and I say that in the broadest sense, I don't mean any kind of organized religion, but just conceiving of some greater reality, some divine reality beyond the hardcore material. There's a couple of things that are appealing there. First of all, you have to try to figure it out. So it's like reading a book. You have to figure it out what the story is. And also it's very personal. That's the other thing that I find is interesting about religion is just as in art, you matter, you the reader, you the viewer, because after all, you're essential. If you turn your back, if you take a book and don't like it, if you leave the cinema house, if you leave the concert hall, the art dies. It needs you, so you matter as a viewer, as a reader, as a listener. And the same thing with religions. Every single religion, you matter to God, to whatever God that might God with me. The individual matters. And so that's very vivifying. That brings you to life. But you have to make your way
Mhm.
there. You have to understand that and you have to work towards that. And that, in a sense, is building upon a dream. We need our dreams. We need our politicians to have dreams for where we want our countries to go with them. Scientists need their dreams to try to see how they can figure out reality. So yeah, I've always been motivated by this idea that we live in our minds, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I don't mean in your head, but I said a lot just comes from what we're thinking, and that will affect our reality. I explore that in Life of Pi, where I
Mhm.
point out how life is deeply subjective. You can't change the facts around you, but you can certainly control how you feel about them. So that comes to
Mhm.
working on your dreams. I think we have to work on our dreams. We have to refine our dreams. And that comes through, as I said, magical thinking. And to me, that's essentially where life is.
Cool.
Once you've got your house and your car and food on the table, yeah, that is a battle. I'm not going to diminish that. Poverty sucks. But once you have enough, where do you go then? And that's where it gets really interesting, I thought.
Mhm. Well, but it's taking those dreams to and making them a reality and then understanding the consequences, for lack of a better word, of the good, the bad, and the ugly of these dreams becoming
Yeah,
real.
yeah, you're right. The
Yeah.
dream can't be someone else's nightmare. Sometimes dreams are best left as dreams, visions in the distance. Sometimes you do want to make
Mm.
them become reality. Although often once they become a reality, they lose interest and your dream state has to move on. But in Harlow's case, yes, he dreams of going to Oxford and he discovers this path. And the Homeric world really is interesting. The world of the Trojan War and all that really is interesting. And it's not only he falls into
Mhm.
a rabbit hole, he's generally driven by passion, but there's a cost to it, as he discovers when his marriage is falling apart. And not to reveal too much, things happen in his family that are deeply upsetting.
I'm stuck on you talking about sometimes dreams should stay dreams. It makes me think about the concept of not meeting
Well,
your heroes, right? Because you don't know what the consequences of that might be, right? And so it's if there's a dream that does keep you moving, maybe having that as your engine is the thing that is more important than it becoming a reality. Anyway, that's gonna something I'm gonna stew on for a little while. Hades is very sassy. I just wanted to say that, and I'm obsessed.
Hades, you said that Hades, he's a
Hades.
god. You know what? He's a Greek
Um,
god that stands out. I always found that interesting. Even when I was a child, interested in Greek myths, all the above ground ones are different parts of our own persona. Our warriors, when we're angry, we're like Ares. When we're aroused, we're like Aphrodite. When we're at school, we're like Athena. We're generally like Zeus when we're being malicious, or we're like Hera, or we're Homer like Hestia. Anyway, each one. But then Hades is just, first of all, he doesn't interact with anyone. He's not necessarily evil. There's no sense in Greek mythology that he's evil. He just runs the underground world, the underworld where the dead come. But he's not like Satan. There isn't that sense that he's evil or trying to tempt you. So I always found very interesting in terms of how he's portrayed. The fact that traditionally he has no children, and yet he's married to the daughter of abundance, the daughter of fertility. And that generally he was not worshipped, which I guess makes sense. He's the Lord of the dead. Why would you worship? But at the same time, maybe you want to have a nice room when you're in the underworld. So maybe you think the Greeks would make offerings to him in the hope of getting a better place in Hades. He just stands apart. And I just thought that was interesting in the way. Like Hephaestus, he's a cripple, and he's portrayed as not being very attractive. But I love that Greek sense of contrast. He's married to Aphrodite. So the contrast, they're not necessarily all good. Like Ares is not portrayed as good. He's often portrayed as being foolish. And they're often very deceptive, the gods, Hera, for example. But Hades, even in that sort of dialogue of contrast, characters, so in this book, I was interested in Soaz meeting him and what they might say and what might be his observations.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite scenes in the book for sure. Okay, before I let you go, I have maybe the most important question I'm going to ask you today. I did my Yann deep dive. I know that you go 100% in all of the things. And one of those things is CrossFit. And what the hell do you like so much about burpees?
Oh, I used to hate burpees, but now they're whole body exercise like a thruster. I love thrusters. They're so hard, but they're whole body. So I like thrusters, burpees, because they're whole body. You know what? I like them, first of all, because I'm good at them. You tend to like what you're good at, but I can do burpees now like crazy.
Sure.
I like burpees. I like thrusters.
Is it just from doing them?
I do.
Them
I got better at them.
Or did they always come to you?
I got better at them. It used to give me a sore back. And I like how these big, huge guys who are full of muscles, they hate burpees because to throw themselves on the ground and get back up is taxing on them. I'm a smaller person and I'm nimble, so I do them quite well. I quite like them. Yeah, I do like burpees. And generally, I love CrossFit. And as a writer, it's a beautifully cerebral experience, but it is not physical. So I love balancing exercise with writing. I couldn't do without it.
Yeah. All right. Knowing that you're maybe more compact makes me feel slightly better. But when I heard that you like burpees, I was like, I might need to cancel this interview. This is my guy,
like doing
not my
CrossFit. What kind of workout do you like?
I don't go to CrossFit. No. I'm like give me an elliptical, give me the treadmill. I'll do a little weightlifting. But when you said you love burpees, that is intense. That's an intense. I could do 2 burpees and then maybe throw up. And
you start with your 2, then you build to 3, then to 4, and soon you'll be doing 50. Soon you'll be doing 3.
You are right. You are right. This is what I need to think about. I'll keep that dream inside of me and not let that be the engine that keeps me going. Yann Martel, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, go get your copy of Son of Nobody. It is out now wherever you get your books. I'm excited for you and your tour and you're going to all of the places around the world. Fantastic. And I can't wait for people to fall in love with this. This is like a little family love story too. That is a surprise. So surprise everyone. You're going to fall in love and be brokenhearted and also learn a lot about Greek mythology and be brought back to high school in a good way.
Listen, thank you very much, Jason. It was a pleasure. And I said maybe one day I'll